Okay, so we're talking about the serial order problem of behavior. And as I mentioned, right, stimulus response behaviorists, they have to explain complex behavior as a linked sequence of responses, which are triggered by previous responses. In other words, they have limited resources for explaining complex behaviors, and they have to view them as linked sequences of responses as a sort of chain with each link determined by the link that immediately precedes it. Um, so not only did Lashley, um, Carl Lashley, reject this idea and say that complex behavior requires planning, right? Uh, but he also noticed, though, how the chaining response sort of assumes that that these behaviors or responses are linked in sort of a linear fashion, right? And he also rejected that idea, and he said that basically that behaviors are organized in a hierarchical fashion. So for example, think of making a cup of coffee. When you make a cup of coffee, what are the steps that are required for you to execute that goal of making a cup of coffee? Uh, here's some of the steps, right? You have to open the coffee maker, you have to put a filter in the maker. You have to grab the coffee, grab a spoon, put the scoop the coffee, then put the coffee in the filter, put the water in the coffee maker, press a button, wait, and then pour the coffee in a mug, which I guess I skipped a step. You have to get the mug first. So, but anyways, but notice though how for each one of these steps, there's also a number of more basic sub tasks that are required. So, for example, here are some of them, right? So, opening the coffee maker, that requires you to first locate the coffee maker and then locate the lid and then open the lid. And then, in order to put the coffee in the maker, you have to locate the filter package. You have to remove the filter from the package. You have to open the lid, and then you have to open the filter. Okay. And then put the filter in the maker. Oh, and then place the filter. And then for grabbing coffee, you have to locate a spoon, and then you have to locate coffee, and so on and so forth. We could do the same thing with scooping the coffee, right? And even here, right, we can still uh, decompose even these smaller subtasks into more sub tasks, so to speak. So, for example, opening the lid requires you to press the lid up and then stop pushing or pressing the lid once it's up, right? And then even at this level, right, there's sub tasks involved, okay? And so according to Lashley, we should think about many of these complex behaviors as products of prior planning and organization, and that the behaviors are organized hierarchically rather than linearly. So for example, an overall plan of walking over to the table to pick up a glass is implemented by simpler plans, right? Let's say the walking plan and then the reaching plan, each of which can also be broken down into simpler plans, and so on, right? And the other thing I should point out is that Lashley asserted that, or argued, I should say, that very little, if any, of this planning takes place at a conscious level. So we may be aware of our overall goal of, making a cup of coffee or picking up a glass, but we're not always as aware of the steps that are involved to get to that goal. We just sort of do it implicitly or on a subconscious level. And yeah, so Lassie would argue that this chaining of simple responses is unlikely, and that the behaviors are organized hierarchically. Some of Lashley's other contributions from this paper is that he sort of hypothesized this idea of subconscious processing, which is that much of what we do is below the threshold of conscious awareness. So as I said, we may be aware of our intention to get a glass of water, for example, but in order to do that, it requires us to calculate the trajectory of our arm and open our hand and close our hand correctly. These are all things that we may not be as aware of as, say, our overall plan. Yeah, that's what I said. Maybe aware of our high level plans and goals, but not the processing that's required to execute that goal. The other one is his idea of task analysis. So the idea that complex tasks can be broken down into a hierarchy of more basic subtasks. So here, this is pretty influential for cognitive psychology and cognitive science as well. And so, for example, with like, say, picture naming, right? You see a picture of a dog. That picture gets registered by the visual recognition system, right? Which requires you to process what that picture is, in a semantic sense. It's a dog, right? In a sort of pre-vocal semantic representation of what a dog is. But then once you figure out what it is, then you need to select the lexical properties of the word. So the actual word that corresponds to the concept of dog. And then once you have the word, then you have to select the phonemes or the sounds that are involved. So if you see dog, then you get the name dog, and then you have to go, okay, well, dog, there's d, and g, and then you go, okay, that's dog, and then you articulate it, right? So just something as simple as naming something has a bunch of subtasks involved. Okay. And so that's it for Lashley. And next time we're going to talk about it's going to be a kind of maybe it might be a short talk where we'll talk about the developments in computation and the computer, and more specifically, the Turing machine.